We have Secureworks principal researcher, Rafe Pilling. Rafe is going to disclose the results of 18 months of research on a fascinating case study. Rafe, you're joining me in the studio in person as well. Hello to you, welcome.
Thank you, it's great to be here. Amazing studio environment, and it's great hearing the insights from Barry and Matt there.
Yeah, totally, an amazing way to kick us off. Now, I know you have a PowerPoint presentation, there's some slides behind you, so I will hand the floor to you. The studio is now your kingdom.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who's joined in today. I think we've got hundreds of people on the line so far, so I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the things I've been working on for 12 months plus now. So my name is Rafe Pilling. I'm the thematic lead for Iran and a principal researcher with the Secureworks Counter Threat Unit. So I'm here today to talk to you about Cobalt Mirage, a group which has been blurring the lines between espionage and cybercrime. So we'll start with a bit of background. Since 2020, multiple Iranian threat groups have been conducting disruptive operations in Israel, and some of those have spread a little bit further. But for the most part, these have been focused on harassment and disrupting of businesses. We've seen groups like Cobalt Fox sort of destructive crypto wiper operations, but all of those and Cobalt Mirage is a little bit different. When I first started looking at them, I thought it was another group in the same sort of vein, but as we've tracked the operations over time, we see some unique features of this group that we don't see with others. So Cobalt Mirage, an Iranian Nexus threat group, began operations around June 2020, some of their initial preparations, but really kind of emerged in the public domain in the first quarter of 2021. Operations ramped up relatively quickly, and rather than just focusing on Israel and some country in the Middle East, this was a global operator really selecting targets based on the opportunity for access and the opportunity for financial exploitation rather than sort of political harassment. Now, Cobalt Mirage is a particularly interesting cluster, and maybe Mirage sort of focuses in on some of the, is a bit of a homage to some of the sort of fuzziness around this group. But by studying them for an extended period of time, we've kind of broken this out into two main clusters. So cluster A focuses on the use of BitLocker and disk encryptor to conduct opportunistic ransomware attacks for financial gain. There is another cluster B that is similar in terms of tradecraft, but appears to have a different motivation, possibly more focused on intelligence collection, but they have also dabbled with ransomware and screen locker type software. But we're going to be focusing in on cluster A today. So to place this in context and to place Cobalt Mirage in context, we believe that Cobalt Mirage is likely closely related but different from another group we track called Cobalt Illusion. So to put this in perspective for other groups, other vendor names, Cobalt Illusion is very similar to sort of Charming Kitten, and Cobalt Mirage very similar to sort of Nemesis Kitten. And we've got some other sort of clusters that Mandiant and Microsoft have defined underneath that. So cluster A, much more like Dev 270, and Mandiant sort of UNC 2448. And that overall group, the two, Cobalt Mirage and Cobalt Illusion together, within Microsoft's sort of phosphorus bucket there. But we're going to focus on cluster A today. And we're going to start this by looking at how they gain initial access. So they're very much focused on scan and exploit activity. They are very efficient, or relatively efficient, at quickly operationalizing sort of popular remote code execution vulnerabilities in popular internet-facing systems. So we saw in around mid-2021 use of the Fortinet FortiOS vulnerabilities. This group and lots of others were exploiting them, but yeah, they quickly sort of operationalized that and used it in their operations. As the ProxyShell vulnerability came along, that was also quickly picked up and used as an initial access vector. And then when Log4Shell came along, it took a little bit longer to operationalize this one, but like others, or like some other threat actors, they quickly figured out that VMware Horizon was one of the sort of software packages that was more vulnerable to this vulnerability, and put it into their operations. In terms of some of the press coverage that this group has received, earlier this year, the FBI talked about a ransomware attack on our Boston Children's Hospital, the Boston Children's Hospital, that was foiled, but was related to this group. And although it wasn't named at the time, we were able to sort of connect the described tradecraft to this group and this has since been disclosed as an incident this group was related to. So in terms of case studies that we've experienced, we've observed in relation to this group, I want to take you through two sort of case studies, the first of which occurred in January 2022. As I mentioned, around this time, ProxyShell was one of the favored initial exploits that this group was using. They would compromise Exchange servers with this exploit. It was essentially the proof of concept code that was collected off a GitHub repository, maybe slightly modified. So gain access to the Exchange server, drop a web shell, use that web shell to gain that initial access. Now, one of the issues with tracking Cobalt Mirage activity is because they use these popular exploits that are used by a wide variety of other groups. We have seen in multiple incidents the fingerprints of Cobalt Mirage alongside other threat actors, some of which we have as defined gold e-crime groups, and some of which are sort of part of the sort of background noise of the cybercrime threat landscape. But it was often the case that you would have multiple actors in these environments. Cobalt Mirage was one of them. In some cases, Cobalt Mirage was edged out by other sort of Russian-speaking ransomware groups, and in others, they sort of won the tussle for that victim. So in this particular case, there was a period of time where that victim was compromised multiple times with ProxyShell, and I think multiple, in fact, web shells were deployed by Cobalt Mirage. But at a point in time in early January, they decided to deploy the usual tradecraft we associate with this group. So they enabled the default account, or added the default account to this target. They moved laterally, and they attempted to, they did deploy sort of BitLocker and encrypt a number of systems. What was particularly interesting in this case, however, was the ransom note was sent to the printer and printed out, and this was how the victim discovered that they'd been attacked by this group. We thought this was a one-off artifact of this particular intrusion. However, this tactic was. So looking at a more recent case study from June 2022, this was a sort of an imaging electronics organization. And again, I'll kind of come back to targeting in a bit, but targeting very much opportunistic and defined by the ability to compromise victims rather than any other sort of factors about those victims. So they came in, ProxyShell exploit, web shell deployed. In this case, dropped a tool we call PowerDown, essentially a PowerShell-based loader, or a loader that uses PowerShell to download the next stage payload, which we call TunnelFish. Do some initial enumeration on the Exchange server, and run some additional commands, which we found were repeated again across multiple intrusions. So this comes back to some of the things you can look out for in relation to this group. And what is interesting is that despite a number of these TTPs, these bits of tradecraft, being reported in the public domain by multiple vendors, they continue to persist in using them. So it may be something we'll continue to see into the future, and certainly worth looking out for. Things like default account, variations on the password that you see there on the screen, and then adding the default account to administrator groups, remote desktop users, that kind of thing, to enable further access by the group. So TunnelFish there is a custom variant of fast reverse proxy client, wrapped with some additional scripting, and it's their sort of tool of choice for providing that persistent access once they've got access via the web shell, provide a bit of redundancy. They run those initial commands out of the tool in order to provide them some further information on the accounts on the Exchange server. Now, what is also quite interesting about this group is, rather than having their own ransomware, they seem to be on a bit of a shoestring budget, or maybe they're just taking a very pragmatic approach to it. But they use the built-in BitLocker full disk encryption solution in order to encrypt files and make them unavailable to the victims. So in this particular script, we can see some commands there that are aimed at enabling BitLocker and enabling some specific registry settings. We can see some additional commands that the group executes in order to add new user accounts that they use. And these accounts are often standard across multiple victims. So we saw the same sort of names popping up and the same passwords used. Haven't seen those particular credentials used in a little while. But again, going back to that default account and those passwords they're using there, we tend to see sort of repetition of tradecraft across incidents. The ransomware message that the group would use was very simple. It set a sort of a message to load when the system was rebooted. Tell the victim that they had been, their files were encrypted, and to contact them via an email address or sometimes a Telegram address in later intrusions. Okay, they used a wide variety of other tools in their intrusions, but again, tools that we see across multiple, both APT and crime groups, things like ubiquitous Mimikatz. Soft Perfect Network Scanner was often deployed to map out the network, and a variety of other tools there sort of supporting their operations. But now we move into some of the most interesting insights we've been able to gain in the past few months. So sometimes, attribution is, can be difficult, can take an extended period of time, and requires a degree of analytical rigor in order to reach an attribution assessment. We were fortunate that a number of mistakes made by Cobalt Mirage enabled us to gain insight into their operations and some of the companies and entities behind this work, or these attacks, I guess. So starting with some malicious infrastructure operated by the group, we were able to pivot back into IP addresses and additional domains that seemed to be part of their sort of back-end infrastructure. Eventually, we worked our way back to an IP address that had 2 Iranian domains hanging off it, secnerd.ir and naji.ir. So we delved into each of those a little further. So secnerd was interesting in that around the same time, Mayhem Day One, or Bob Giachenko, had just published some findings on Twitter, about this Elasticsearch cluster he discovered that contained the sort of social media and other details about a large tranche of Iranian citizens. And he was able to tie this exposed database back to secnerd. So secnerd appeared to be collecting this database on Iranian citizens for unknown purposes. But it was an interesting sort of insight into this group, or this company that had previously not really made a splash on the internet. But what about Naji? So the other domain there, we delved into that, and doing a bit of research, we were able to uncover some prior interest in hacking, and some of the handles that are associated with an individual related to naji.ir. So looking back in time, around 2015, we were able to see an interest in defacement. The persona unknown was being reused there. The individual associated with this website was expressing sort of anti-US, anti-Israel sentiments, and stating that an Iranian hacker was there. So that gives us a bit of background on secnerd and Naji. Certainly there appears to be an interest in sort of cybersecurity, Iranian domestic monitoring, and sort of international hacking and defacement, particularly focused at the US and Iran. And as we delved further into the infrastructure there, we're able to map out a number of other connections that actually linked an individual called Mansour Ahmadi back to these domains and this wider cluster of infrastructure. So that's Mansour Ahmadi, the unknown persona, and a range of infrastructure that appears to be related to Cobalt Mirage. So that was one part of it. Then more recently, we had a bit of a windfall. Sort of thing doesn't happen all the time, but in a recent intrusion, we were able to recover an artifact. So usually, Cobalt Mirage will deliver a text file-based ransom note, and we saw a copy that had been printed out earlier. In this case, however, they brought in a PDF copy of the note, and that PDF copy had metadata attached to it. The PDF metadata said that the individual that created that PDF file was someone called Ahmed Katabi. And if we Google for an Ahmed Katabi, we see there's an individual with that name who's the CEO of Afghar Systems, a company based in Iran. We were also able to look at the timestamp when this file was created and see that this is created in Iran Standard Time. So both of those sort of interesting indicators pointing towards an Iranian entity behind this particular document. Now, further to that was the fact that Ahmed Katabi had also been mentioned by Labduk-Tegan, a persona that since about 2019 has been leaking information about Iranian APT groups. And Labduk-Tegan cited Afghar System and Ahmed Katabi as working for the intelligence organization of SEFA, or the IRGC as they're more formally known. And we also had other references to Naji Technologies also being linked to the IRGC. So both of these companies, Afghar System and Naji Technology, two individuals, Mansour Ahmadi and Ahmed Katabi, being revealed as potentially behind this, this activity. So then we move on to potentially this sort of operational model where we have these two companies supporting or playing a role in Cobalt Mirage activity, potentially being tasked by the IRGC or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps intelligence function. So the IRGC is a sort of a military formation in Iran that operates in the Navy and is there reporting directly to the supreme leader. And in other cases, other Iranian companies such as Eminat Pasargad and MRA there had both been cited as working on behalf of the IRGC. So again, this kind of brings us back to the high confidence assessment that the IRGC contracts with multiple Iranian service providers to support and conduct offensive cyber operations, and Naji and Afkar were some of those entities. Now, I'll pause here for a moment. On the screen, you'll be able to see a QR code. This will take you directly to two technical blogs. Actually, it'll take you to the threat group profile that we've maintained on Cobalt Mirage. But that will also cite the technical blogs that we have that are related to the group. So I've kind of skipped over some of the technical details here because I have a relatively short time to get through the presentation. But there is a good amount of technical information in those two blogs, particularly some additional detail on the sort of more recent findings, the more recent attribution to those two groups. So what was particularly interesting on the day, 14th September, when we released that blog, we were also fortuitously, it was fortuitous that the US government also released a number of publications. So also on the 14th of September, an indictment was released that referenced Afkar System and Naji Technology and two of the individuals that we included in today's presentation. There was also a sanctions document that named 10 individuals, but all of them which were employees of Afkar System and Naji Technologies, and sanctions were applied to them by the US Department of Treasury. And last but not least, a great technical advisory from CISA and partners, citing some additional tradecraft and indicators associated with this group. So I'd strongly recommend going out and reading each of those documents, particularly the advisory. I think we are distributing some links to these documents, but if not, we can maybe drop them in the chat later. So just to sort of wrap up and just cover some final takeaways. Bottom line is the Cobalt Mirage, unlike other sort of disruptive Iranian ransomware and harassment groups we've seen, is focused on cybercrime. It's a global cybercrime group with the added risk of connections to the IRGC. In addition, we would assess that APT groups operating under the cover of cybercrime and hacktivism provide a convenient, deniable proxy resource for the Iranian state, and we may see more of these sort of groups emerging, both focusing on Israel and more global sort of operations. In terms of what you can do to protect and detect this group, protect from and detect this group, patching internet-facing vulnerabilities goes a long way against a number of threats we face these days, both in the APT and the cybercrime space. In terms of monitoring, looking out for the default account activation or use, looking out for unauthorized activations of BitLocker, looking for tools like FRPC, ngrok, Chisel, other sort of tunneling tools commonly used by this group and others, and also hunt for some of the indicators of compromise that we include in the blogs. Okay, there's everything I had for everyone today. Jules, yeah.
I have
if we have any time for questions, we do have time for questions. Okay, you can.
It was so cool just to hear you dig into your. I just want to get an understanding, because you shared a few details about how these ransomware attacks operate, and I know you talked about them looking like they seem to be on a shoestring budget, and these PDF kind of incidents and so on. I just want to get from your experience, how do Cobalt Mirage ransomware attacks compare to other ransomware attacks, if you were to compare? Yeah,
great question. I mean, so we can think back to some of the sort of SamSam attacks. I think sort of 2016 timeframe, a group we tracked as Gold Lowell, and this turned out to be a couple of Iranians that were behind some of the attacks. So Iran does have form in this sense. Right. However, most of the ransomware attacks we see today are Russian-speaking groups. And certainly their operations are on a different scale, much more sort of operationalized. Tim is going to come on and talk to to everyone about some of that, but more professional, I would say. They very much treat it as a business. They have software developers, tech support people. They operate at an entirely different scale than we're seeing Cobalt Mirage operating at. Obviously, Cobalt Mirage, it looks like there's a significant degree of sort of manual work. They're making these mistakes. They're less sort of professional. Will that improve over time? Who knows? But yeah, they're not quite in the same sort of league as some of the Russian-speaking groups yet.
Yeah, and you talk about will it improve over time? Are we seeing a change in frequency, for example? Are we seeing more attacks of this type and of this variety?
I think we're certainly seeing more of these sort of hacktivism and cybercrime personas being adopted by Russian groups, Iranian groups. That is maybe a tactic that will continue. There's certainly benefit in these groups presenting themselves as cybercrime operations. For one, they can either create revenue streams for themselves or perhaps create revenue streams for the IRGC or the Iranian government. It also provides this sort of convenient cover because lots of countries have problems with cybercrime. We can't, it's not necessarily something governments can control, and so having this sort of developed cybercrime capability that's under the direction of a government entity can be very useful.
Totally. Rafe, really cool to see you kind of outline your journey with uncovering this over a series of, over a year, wasn't it? Like you say, there are links to more educational pieces, more blogs that are being posted. There was that QR code, and I'm sure we can organise for links to be posted in the chat. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great to have you up here.
No, thank you very much. It's been great to present the work, and it's been a long road, lots of people involved. I've got a great team I work with that supported me on lots of different aspects of that work, so big thank you to them as well.
I can see that. Rafe, thank you.